Hello historians, and welcome to another Purple Shirt History. In this video, we'll be doing the IGCSE depth study for Germany, 1918 to 1945. I'll go over the main points with you. You could take notes and then research them further on your own time. I also want to say happy holidays as it's the end of the year. Thank you very much for joining the channel and taking the time to watch what I produced. I've always wanted to do something like this, and hopefully next year we can keep on growing bigger and better. So sit back, relax, grab your notebook, and enjoy the video. As the most recognized resource for IGCSE history is the Ben Walsh book, I'll start there. If you go to the back of the book, past the core content, you'll see some depth study pages here. And this is the first page of the Germany 1918 to 1945 depth study. What we see on the left is a propaganda poster, and this is a good starter to show the kids because they probably don't know what the Weimar government is or don't know much about it. So we'll start with this propaganda poster to see what their background knowledge of the Nazi regime was. And most students can pick out that the eagle represents the Nazi party. We see a large family, 3 kids with 2 happy parents, and the wings are around the family as to say the eagle is protecting it. So the depth study pages in the Ben Walsh book are a good place to start, but by no means will that be enough to get an A-star either in coursework or paper 4. So I really love access to history. I'm a huge fan. I'm a huge fan of this series of books. I think they're excellent. They are aimed at A-level students, so the audience is supposed to be older, but I really think if you give these to the kids at year 11, they will respond. And I've done this for years and years, and I've had a lot of success with giving access to history to IGCSE students, even though it's meant for the A-level students. It is richly detailed, it is simple to read, it has great summary charts and maps and statistics and everything you need to break down these complex topics. So I really recommend getting this book from Second Reich to Third Reich, Germany, 1918 to 1945. It says Edexcel on here, but don't worry, it's completely fine for the Cambridge exams. So just briefly to go over the contents, Chapter 1 is the German Revolution, meaning the democratic revolution after World War I. The Kaiser abdicates, and we see the formation of the Weimar Government. We see Friedrich Ebert and the Social Democrats be the largest party in Germany, and they have quite the mess on their hands with Germany having lost the war, the armistice in late 1918, and the kind of chaos that will happen within Germany soon thereafter, which takes us into Chapter 2, Weimar's political crisis, the Weimar Constitution, which is not good, to put it mildly. There is an article in there called Article 48 that basically says you can rule dictatorially, and that is just that's not what you want to put into your constitution. So live and learn, I guess. So that is an important point to bring up with your students. It talks about the Treaty of Versailles and all of the terms that damaged Germany with loss of territory, reparations, and so on. The extreme left, so you should spend a lesson going over the communist revolution in Germany that failed, Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. The extreme right, not so much there is no Nazi party at this time, but the nationalists and monarchists that want to keep fighting or want to have the Kaiser continue to lead Germany. Then Chapter 3, we see the Great Inflation, which is talking about the Ruhr crisis and the fallout after that. And many people know of the massive hyperinflation that happened in Germany when people were having to spend billions of marks on bread. Prices were changing from morning to afternoon to evening. And it all comes to a head there in 1923, 1924. There we see Chapter 4, Weimar, the Years of Stability, 1924 to 29. This is they call the Goldene Zwanziger, which is the golden 20s, that have stability, a growing economy, a lot of cultural experimentation. On the thumbnail, if you're wondering what that picture was, on the bottom left, it is the logo for the Bauhaus movement, which was industrial design house that I love. I think it's great, and you should spend a lesson on it. But not just the Bauhaus architecture and industrial design. There's also a lot of other very interesting things going on in these 5 years of stability in film, in culture, in art, in literature, and all these types of things. I have a project that students do about something special that happened in the 1920s there, and it usually works out excellently. Some of the best projects of the year are from that topic. Chapter 5, Early Years of the Nazis, 1919 to 1929. We see how much of a fringe party and how on the edges of German society the Nazis were. There's the Munich beer hall putsch, which gets put down violently. A lot of Nazis die. Hitler is thrown into prison. He gets a very light sentence, though, and gets to write his book in fairly comfortable surroundings due to a sympathetic judge. But we start to see a coalescence of what the Nazi Party stands for. Their founding documentation, their goals, and so on. But they are very much one of many far-right parties vying for power in the Weimar government. Chapter 6, The Decline of Weimar and the Rise of Nazism, 1929 to 1932. This is a big turning point in world history. You can't really see the Nazis taking power in any meaningful way without the economic depression, the massive unemployment in Germany, and everything that happens when American loans freeze up, high tariff barriers get set up around the world, and international trade grinds to a halt. And it's just masterfully used by Hitler and his propaganda minister Goebbels to get support legally through free and fair elections. The Nazis are chosen by the German people due to a number of factors, but a lot of them are predicated on the Wall Street crash and the Great Depression. So this needs to be studied in detail. And you'll see the share of votes from before the Wall Street crash and after the Wall Street crash, and they're night and day. There's a massive upswing in Nazi support after October 1929. Chapter 7, The Nazi Road to Dictatorship, 1932 to 1934. There are a few politicians in here that are completely outsmarted by Hitler. They are old, aristocratic, not very bright guys who get played like a fiddle. Takes some daring by Hitler to demand to have a high position of power and then get it. And there's some bad timing as well with Hindenburg's death, which allows the Enabling Act, and we see how the Nazis get into power. And almost immediately we see the change in early 1933 from the Weimar government to Nazification of society, politically, culturally, economically, and so on. I find Chapter 7 to be probably the most interesting because we see the rapidity of the Nazi program and how extreme it is. All political parties are banned. Independent newspapers are banned. This is a societal takeover. Gleichschaltung means harmonization or synchronization, synchronizing Nazi ideology into the German mainstream. And this is a darkly fascinating thing to study because it's terrifying to see this democratic republic die and this totalitarian regime within weeks just start remaking the society in their vision, which will lead to Germany's destruction in less than 12 years. Chapter 8, The Nazi Economy. The Nazi economy is run by a guy named Hjalmar Schacht. You'll get to know him in your lessons. How does the Nazi economy work? It's incredibly complicated. And this is a difficult chapter, but for the teacher, look into Schlacht and then look into Goering. These are the two main guys, Hermann Goering. And then for the students, the Nazis do benefit from a bit of an economic upswing after they attain power. We see Germany have some creative methods done by Schlacht to get foreign investment, and public works programs, and of course rearmament helps to suck up a lot of that unemployment. So Chapter 8 is quite complex, but for the coursework and paper 4, I believe it can be simplified down to a few basic points that you can really expand in your writing and get high marks. So Chapter 8 is definitely one that will get you a lot of marks. Chapter 9, Nazi Society. We see the focus on heavy propaganda, indoctrination, especially with the youth from a very young age. Hitler is focused on raising Nazis to worship him, to see him as a father figure and not their biological parents, to eliminate religion as much as possible, to get rid of all other independent centers of power like social groups, Catholic organizations, football clubs, art clubs, Boy Scouts. Anything independent that was not under Nazi control was co-opted and eventually folded into groups that the government controlled. Women in the family, the traditional role, was idolized by the Nazis, as we saw in that early propaganda picture in the core content book. Women were encouraged to have a lot of children so they can grow up and fight and die for Germany. Chapter 10, the racial state. There is another access to history book on anti-Semitism and the Holocaust, which is a good supplemental reading for this. But I wouldn't say it's absolutely required, because that's a lot to ask from the students to read 2 access to history books and the Ben Walsh book and the other supplemental readings that you'll give them. So maybe just take a chapter or 2 out of that book if you can get it. And we see the anti-Semitism as a central role of the Nazi state, scapegoating, blaming Jews and other minorities for all of Germany's problems, using very vitriolic rhetoric to condition people for mass violence against Jews and eventual organized murder. Chapter 11, what was the police state and what was the propaganda machine, and was there any resistance? Hitler spent most of his days, by many accounts, just dreaming up giant cities that he was going to build in this new Germania that was going to be comprised of territories that were conquered. He wasn't one for the day-to-day minutia of government, so he would just have other people take care of things, or he would set 2 people to do the same task and watch them fight over his favor, basically. Who he thought would have the more radical idea, and whoever had the more radical idea was usually what he chose. The police state, meaning the Gestapo. How totalitarian was the Nazi state? Was there any room for resistance? Was there any room for personal freedom or not? How many people were informants? And just what was the overall climate? Was it a climate of fear, or were people genuinely in line with this? The propaganda machine and Goebbels. Goebbels is one of the key figures. I would say he warrants his own project to do. You can see how messaging was such a central theme to the Nazi regime. Hitler in Mein Kampf said, you need to have very simple messaging and repeat it over and over and over again until it's drilled into people's heads. Goebbels used newspapers, propaganda posters, movies, radio, any technological medium at the time to just wash the brains of the German people day in and day out. Then we see it all come crashing down. Germany at war, 1939 and 1940 are very successful years for Germany. with the fall of Poland and France, Norway, Low Countries, etc. But after the Battle of Britain and then the invasion of the Soviet Union, it all starts to go one way. And after Pearl Harbor, Germany is now fighting the Soviet Union, the British Empire, and America, and it's doomed, with unconditional surrender being the end of the Nazi regime.